President Biden has until this Sunday to declassify any and all intelligence relating to how COVID began, how the virus came to be, as required by the COVID-19 Origin Act of 2023. Now, two Republican lawmakers, Missouri Senator Josh Hawley and Indiana Senator Mike Braun, say the administration has not given any indication of when it will release those materials. Ambassador John Bolton, who served as U.S. National Security Advisor during the Trump administration and was the U.S. Ambassador to the UN during George W. Bush's administration, is with me right now. Ambassador Bolton, always good to have you here. The deadline's Sunday. Are Democrats dragging their feet or delaying reporting this information from what you've heard?
Well, it's hard to say what their strategy is. I think they're very worried about what the report may reveal. We don't know what they'll redact on the basis that they need to protect intelligence sources and methods, which is a legitimate reason to do it. And I think their real concern is that this report may well add to the growing body of evidence that this was a leak from the famous lab at Wuhan. It's not a disease that was transmitted from bats to humans in a wet market near the Wuhan railroad station. And they've got Secretary of State Antony Blinken arriving in Beijing on Sunday, so the timing isn't very good for the administration. But I do think it's very important to get out what they can get out, because I think the American people need to know more about what I believe to be China's responsibility for this.
Well, are we expecting all of these documents to boil down to a Beijing cover-up?
Well, I think we've had evidence of Beijing trying to cover up the origins of COVID right from the beginning, using their surrogate, the head of the World Health Organization, barring international observers, epidemiologists and physicians from coming in, from interviewing some of the key people, some of whom actually died from COVID during the early period. And as long as we don't know really as much as we can about the origins of the disease, it's very hard to know how to guard against it in the future. And the actions the Chinese government has taken ever since we first heard of it really speak to their motive, I think.
But in terms of the independent reporting, we've seen several citing independent, or rather U.S. government officials who identified researchers at the Wuhan Institute of Virology as the so-called patient zero of the pandemic. A lot of sources reflecting their confidence about this reporting. It doesn't necessarily mean that anything else is ruled out, correct?
Right, and I think the kind of unspoken fear that lurks here is, I'll just put it this way, for many, many years there's been public speculation here and elsewhere that China has a clandestine biological weapons program. So some research can be done in full public view, funded in part by American and other foreign funds, that then when key information is uncovered, it goes behind the wall of secrecy, but becomes part of the Chinese biological weapons program. And I think there could well be indications here, if we could see more into the activities of the Wuhan lab, that they were doing kind of dual-use research.
Obviously, tensions have arisen between the U.S. and China in a greater way. What happens to the relations that the U.S. has with Beijing once these documents are released and declassified?
Well, sure, it depends in part, obviously, on how much is actually released and how much is redacted. But the Chinese have not only denied that they were in any way responsible for the outbreak of COVID, they've in prior statements accused the United States of creating it and introducing it into China. So I'm not looking for a terribly objective response by Beijing here. I think it's likely to be more propaganda.
What if Democrats and what if the Biden administration end up skipping this deadline? What happens then?
Well, I think that would be a big political mistake on their part. I think people are very worried about what the true origins of COVID were. This has obviously been a contentious period politically, and I think getting the facts out is the best way to help restore confidence that the government's actually trying to do the right thing. And there are legitimate concerns about protecting intelligence sources and methods. Nobody should quarrel about that. But let's see actually how much does get released and how candid the administration is.
Yeah, the optics of not releasing information, especially based on what you just said there, certainly could be damning ahead of 2024. Ambassador Bolton, thank you as always.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.